Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee LaValle McKenna. I'll be your host. And today I want to talk about being good enough for God. You know, my kids went to Catholic school, and my daughter, in fact, is still in Catholic school. And it's a wonderful community. I love a lot of what happens in Catholic education for her. But one of the things that I've noticed is this uptightness that happens, particularly around church and any religious studies about being perfect. You have to be quiet in church, you have to dress a certain way, and certainly there's nothing wrong with that to some extent. Or maybe there is, actually. Because I think what it does is it instills the idea that we have to be good enough for God. That somehow, if we aren't dressed the right way, if we don't speak the right way or act the right way, that we'll be rejected or we're somehow being disrespectful to the divine. Certainly, there's something to be said for preparing yourself for ritual and dressing a certain way, more to set your own mindset for being able to be open. But a lot of what I have experienced in church is not about preparing the self. It's actually about preparing ourselves so that we look good enough for other people or that we appear good enough for God. And the problem with that is that there's some idea that we aren't okay the way we are. And that is not my experience. Almost all of the powerful spiritual experiences that I have had have happened at unexpected times, often when I'm in my worst, when I most need help. And that is when the goddess of my understanding, the life force that has created me as I am and continues to support me in all that I do, as it does with all of us, the breathing in and breathing out conversation that I'm continually having with life, it meets me in every single moment. And I don't need to prepare for it in any special way. In fact, sometimes being prepared for it in this more traditional, uptight, have to look a certain way or speak a certain way or act a certain way attitude keeps me from actually being open to receiving what I need in the deepest places, because it is my imperfections, it's my woundedness, it's the things I actually don't like about myself, the places that I'm weak and underdeveloped and insecure and challenged. That's where I really need help. If I'm covering those up, trying to look good for God, then the things that really, really need to be revealed, they're hidden. So I'm actually sometimes in preparing myself, I'm actually defending myself or blocking myself from what I actually need. I had a great experience. I had breakfast with a recovering drug addict just the other day. He told me this fabulous story. So he's been trying to get sober on and off for years. He's actually a meth addict and an alcoholic. He had a couple days clean from methamphetamine, and a series of circumstances happened, and he decided that he was going to call his dealer. So he called his dealer, and he went over to meet the guy, and they met out in a parking lot, and he got into the car, and he gave the guy the money, and the guy got out of the car, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and the guy didn't come back. He ripped him off, basically. He stole his money, like another good drug addict. He stole my friend's money, and he didn't come back. What Tom said was, you know, it's funny because I didn't even get mad. I just thought, you know, I guess this means I'm supposed to stay sober. And he ended up going to a 12-step meeting that afternoon instead of getting high. And he lost however much money he lost, but he was able to keep his recovery, and he actually has stayed clean since that day. You know, we were talking about that's the grace of God and how God works in mysterious ways, how Spirit works and meets us right where we are in infinitely creative ways all the time to give us often exactly what we need. That experience for Tom was a spiritual awakening for him, to realize that there was something that was doing for him what he couldn't do for himself, that he had set an intention to stay clean and he didn't have the individual strength to do it. And this is really what, for me, spiritual practice is about. It's about accessing power that we don't have access to ourselves. It's supplementing, adding to our own resources by being able to be willing and open and receive the universal life force that's all around us and always waiting to support us. As we continued the conversation, I was saying to Tom how, my experience is that when we set an intention, as he did, he set an intention that he wanted to stay sober. Once we set that intention, once we really, really ask for help, when we humble ourselves, and it's often when we're at our worst. It's often when we've had tremendous failure and we've come to the edge of all the light we know and all the smartness we can think of and every great idea that we have. It's often when we come to the edge of ourself and our own limitations that's when things will really change. Which is why this idea of being good enough for God, of trying to prepare myself and look a certain way and act a certain way, is actually like creating a mask. And my experience is that can actually serve the opposite purpose of allowing me to connect with the spiritual connection that I'm looking for. And it can actually block me from it because I'm in this kind of fake self and thinking I need to be a certain way or I should be a certain way. Whenever the word should comes up, all kinds of flags go up for me, because generally should is somebody else's idea and it's not about who I really am. The God of my understanding wants me exactly how I really am. And because that's the place, when I'm being real, that's the place where actual work can happen. If I'm trying to look good and smell good and feel good and just act outside of my own authenticity, if I'm trying to put on a social mask so that you'll think I'm all that, or even my own ego idea of myself, then I'm shut down. I'm all set. Thank you very much. I don't need any help. I'm not open to receive. And being open to receive is really, I think, where almost every person I know needs to grow. Most of us are pretty good at putting it out there. Being able to actually receive requires us to be open, vulnerable, honest. It's a really different position. But that's where we get the good stuff. That's where we get the connection. That's where we get the grace. That's where we get the new, I like to call it variable X. That's when new stuff can happen. That's when the life force can do its magic, mystic creation process that it does of making compost out of garbage a lot of the time. I live in the Bay Area. We have a rainy season and a dry season, and very much like what happened in Boston when I was growing up, where we had 4 seasons. In the spring, after 6 months of everything being gray and dry and these little twigs on trees that looked like they would never bloom anything, they bloom flowers and buds, and in the spring it's a miracle. Like, whoa, how did that happen out of these seemingly dead trees? And the same thing happens here in the Bay Area when we have rain after 6 months of a dry spell, or sometimes we've had droughts where it's even like 18 months of a dry spell, and the rain will come, and within 2 days there'll be little sprouts shoot up all over the place in these things that look like dead, deserted fields. To me, that is a metaphor for what happens inside of us and in our lives all the time, that there are seeds under the surface that we can't see, and in the right conditions, with the right rain and the right sun, those things can bloom. We don't have to make that up. I didn't plant all those little seeds that sprouted a couple of months ago when the rain started, and I often have not planted the seeds that have grown in my own life. What I can do to water them and to provide the sun for them is I can prepare myself, not by dressing fancy and talking the right way, but by being open and honest and vulnerable, both within myself and with other people. And when I can be open and honest and vulnerable, then I can receive. And then the magic that I've experienced, that I see other people experience, that happened with Tom, Now, that may not seem like Tom's story of being ripped off by a drug dealer might not seem like the grace of God, but in my experience, it is. The divine works to meet us exactly where we are, to speak the language that we perfectly need to hear. My Creator created me and knows everything about me without judgment. That all of the things about me that I might think are good and bad, they can all be of service. They can be of service to others. They can be of service to my community. They can be of service to me. When I can hold them, again, in this honest, humble way. So I've been divorced twice now. And geez, there are certain religious communities who would think that I'm like a sinner. And maybe I am, but I have a lot of friends that are sinners too, so that's just fine. But my experience now is that being divorced twice is actually a gift that my experience, as unique and quirky and crazy as it is actually of service to people. I'm a therapist, and I have had a whole wave of people coming to me who are in very unhappy marriages, now looking for counsel in what to do, perhaps to leave or perhaps to do work within the relationship they have. And, I can be this really compassionate voice. I have a lot of experience in this. So my experience benefits others. In that way, there are no boundaries of what's good enough for God. The woman who saved my life in 1987 was a convicted felon. She had been a street prostitute for years. She was a heroin addict, and most of her friends had died of AIDS. And that woman spoke to me and told me what the next 20 years of my life was going to be like if I continued along the path that I was going, which was to become a sex worker. I was already a drug addict. I was thinking about shooting heroin. And I definitely was going to go to prison for shoplifting because although I had been really good at it for a while, I was getting sloppy. She was exactly the right person at exactly the right time. If she had been a cleaned up, nice little Catholic girl, nothing wrong with Catholic girls. I have a nice little Catholic girl here. I can pass for one myself. But if she had been in any other form, I might be dead right now. But because of her experience, because of her difficulties, because of her imperfections and her problems, because of her deficits, she was able to speak to me and be the agent for grace that I needed, that changed my life and saved my life. I know that I've been able to do the same. I want to encourage you to be your most authentic self, both what you think is good about you and both what you think isn't, because we don't know what can be of service. And when we're willing to surrender ourselves and be open and honest and vulnerable, every single thing about us can be useful, even the things that we might be ashamed of or want to hide. In fact, often those things that we're most ashamed of are the things that can be most helpful to other people. There is no such thing as being good enough for God, because we're good enough just the way we are right now. In fact, all the unique, quirky brilliance, all the things about us that are good, bad, ugly, honest, dishonest, all of it, it's all can be useful if we're willing to reveal ourselves. Everything about us can be useful if we're willing to be open and vulnerable and of service to others. Every asset also has a defect. Every defect has an asset. My anger, which can be used to harm people, can also be in service of standing up for justice. My desire to be controlling and aggressive can also be assertiveness and an ability to get things done. Being willing to be open about who I really am is my job. When I can be my authentic self, all the things about me that make me unique, that is the ingredient that I'm supposed to bring into this soup we call life. We're each like an ingredient in a big stew. I'm cooking a beef stew right now. Each of us adds a unique flavor, and we're supposed to be who we are. We aren't supposed to be anybody else. We aren't supposed to be what our parents think we're supposed to be, or our church, or our culture, or our ethnic background. we're supposed to be who we are. When I can most do that, I'm on my own path to joy and fulfillment, and I'm also, I believe, of maximum service to myself, to my higher power, and to others. So there's no such thing as being good enough for God, because you already are exactly how you are right now, today. So bring that into the world to the best of your ability, and blessings on your path. This is Renee LaValle McKenna. Until we meet again, this is Spiritual Psychology.